is the stupidity in the extreme. First of all, you have 139 hostages still held by Hamas, and so you say once you release the hostages, we're going to start assassinating your leaders. What's the incentive to release the hostages at that point in time? What's the incentive to negotiate with Israel? And here's the other thing too: it ain't like Israel's winning this war. I mean, they've been fought to a standstill. They're taking heavy casualties. It's literally, this is just amateur hour in the extreme. Which leads me to believe that it was done for domestic political consumption, that Netanyahu is in so much trouble now. Let me tell you how much trouble he's in. That's where you're supposed to say. How much trouble is he in, Scott?
How much trouble is he in, Scott?
Oh, he's in a lot of trouble. They had a 6-day ceasefire where they were successfully getting hostages released, part of the exchange program. And then Israel said, "Nah, we're going to go back." Today, 3 hostages were either released or escaped. And the Israeli Defense Force shot them. First of all, it tells you how scared the Israeli Defense Force is. They shot 3 unarmed men. How there's no fire discipline whatsoever. They just shot them. No warning, no halt, no anything. Just flat out shot them. They shot their own people, killed them. Oh my God, the families of the 139 remaining hostages are enraged. They are gathering around Benjamin Netanyahu, screaming for him to stop this war and get their people out. Other hostages are coming out and they're starting to tell the stories. They said, "We didn't fear Hamas while we were being held. We feared Israel. Israel was the one killing us. Israel, we feared the bombs." Netanyahu is in horrific trouble. So he has to appease his base, because his base is starting to feel a little exposed here. And so this is what the Mossad thing is. I think it's a public PR campaign because it's stupid as hell. If I were a Mossad assassin, I'd quit right now. I would just say, what the hell are you doing telling the world that I'm going to run around trying to kill Hamas people? Are you stupid? And the answer is yes. So I sort of doubt that there's Hamas or Mossad hit teams in Qatar trying to hunt down and kill Hamas officials there. First of all, you're going to be in Qatar. That means that the Qataris, they own that turf. How do you get in? How do you get out? And now that you've highlighted yourself, they're going to be looking for every Irishman, Canadian, and whatever, German businessman, because, Mossad, there's only certain number of ways you can infiltrate people into places covertly, and you pretty much used them all. Everybody knows whose passports you've stolen, whose passports you forge, what covers you use. And so now, and plus, remember, this is a recently announced initiative. And so unless Mossad has a cell already in place in Qatar that's been doing things for, say, 10 years, just shining shoes and selling books and waiting for the phone call to come to go kill people, they've got to bring those assets in. And the Qataris are going to be all over that. So I personally believe that this was more for domestic political consumption, and the politics of it. Again, to put out a bounty like that is to create mistrust. It's not as though the Israelis expect any Gazan to say, "Hey, I know where you are. Is right over here. Pay up, buddy." Because the moment you pay up, they're dead. They're going to die. They receive the money. They don't even get to spin it before boom, 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 you go down. So no Gazan's going to turn in the guy. But what you've done now is you create doubt, because now people are going to be going, or at least the Israelis want them to create doubt, going, who's going to turn in whom? Can I trust you? Are you going to get the money? Who's going to get the money? And that's the whole idea. The CIA used this tactic against the Palestinian, various Palestinian groups in the 1980s, where they basically planted the seed of doubt within that there was an informer. And basically, at the end of the day, what happened is that group went into sort of a Stalinistic rage and arrested everybody and executed everybody and self-destructed. It was the easiest victory the CIA has ever had, because they didn't have to do anything. They just said, don't trust these people and insert the seeds, and they let it happen. So I think that's what the Israelis are trying to do right now, is to create doubt within the ranks of Hamas, within the Gazan population. But it ain't going to work, because these people are as united as they've ever been. Hamas is more popular today than they've ever been. recent poll shows that Hamas would easily win over 70% of the vote throughout all of the Palestinian territories if there was an election today. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
All right, we have a voicemail message from a woman named Esther.
Hello. My question is, do you expect that Western European countries will try to rebuild their relationship with Russia when Ukraine surrenders? And also, what would you advise governments in Western Europe to do to regain Russia's trust? Thank you.
That's a good question. Let's go with the first part. I think they have to. They have no choice. The European economy is going to need to get energy quickly, and it has to be affordable. They can't go around paying these 30%, 40%, 50% premiums on natural gas, enriching the United States while they bankrupt their own economies. And it's going to happen sooner rather than later. You're already seeing a division in Europe, and it's going to become the haves and the have-nots. The nations that will continue an energy relationship with Russia will succeed, and the nations that walk away from this will fail. And so I think right off the bat, that's going to be the other thing is once this war ends, all the garbage that's being spouted by Biden and what I call the Putin whispers about Russia's nefarious intent against NATO is going to be proven false. Once this war ends and they see that Russia is, again, I just advise people to listen to Putin. He sort of tells, the guy telegraphs exactly what Russia is going to do. He laid it all out there in the question and answer. You just got to be patient enough to wade through 3 hours, 45 minutes of questions. And you gain a lot of insights into how he works, how the Russian government works, what their priorities are, and how they go about prioritizing things. The Russian military is on what they call a victory budget for the next 3 years. All right. Now, does that victory budget mean that they think the war is going to continue for 3 more years? No, I think Russia's made it clear they think the war is going to end in 2024. But Russia still has to respond to the expansion of NATO. That means Finland. They have 60,000 troops they have to put up in a new military district outside of St. Petersburg. That costs money. It takes time. 3-year victory budget. The West has said that they're going to fool around up in the Arctic. Russia has to respond. Russia has to build up military force to do that. The Japanese are playing games in the Kuril Islands. Russia has to respond. But Russia's responding defensively. They're not responding offensively. So after they take Ukraine, Russia's going to go into a mode that says we have to have sufficient force to receive any attack, repel any attack, and carry out whatever counteroffensive actions are necessary to eliminate the threat. But it was interesting. I was talking to a very senior Russian a little while ago, and I talked about war with NATO, and I was babbling on about well, it's going to be conventional, and they're going to do it. And he said, Scott, you don't understand. The moment we go to war against NATO, we just assume it's going nuclear. And so we're going to hit them first with the missiles. And I'm like, well, you're not even going to play on the ground? There's not even be a little bit of, let's see who's better conventionally? Said, no. But that's predicated on a NATO attack. He says, once NATO attacks us, we have to assume that they've made the decision that they're going to see it through, that they're seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. And so once they attack us, we assume the worst and we just take them all out. And what shall be, shall be. Which tells me that Russia's not looking to attack anybody. So all this nonsense that Joe Biden's out there, we have to defeat him in Ukraine or else my uncle and my father, who was resurrected apparently and lives in a kibbutz near Gaza, even though he died in 2002. I'm sorry, I'm making fun of a senile old man, and I'm not supposed to do that. But the point is, it's just fantasy. because that whole scenario he painted is predicated on Russia attacking Poland, Russia attacking the Baltics. Russia is not going to do that. Russia is going to win the war in Ukraine. They're going to win decisively. It will be not a good outcome for Ukraine no matter what. But Russia will not attack NATO. They're not going in that direction. And therefore, once that becomes obvious, I think you're going to see the Europeans now in a quandary. Do we bankrupt our already bankrupt economies even more by trying to build a military capable of defeating Russia? It isn't going to happen, guys. Or do we build a military that is what is expected of in terms of self-defense, legitimate self-defense, but we can even keep it mitigated even more by ensuring that the Russians aren't viewing us as the enemy? A new European security framework. Where have we heard that before? December 2021, Russia put forward draft treaties to the United States and to NATO outlining their vision of a new European security framework. So the U.S. Congress ought to prevent U.S. Good luck. I mean, let's see if it happens. I think that might not pass constitutional muster, but we have to see. The president is the executive. I think the Constitution gives him exclusive purview over executive decisions. So, it's interesting that Congress wants to do that. But this, so Russia isn't going to attack. Europe will be looking for better relations. It may take a couple years. Now, what can Europe do to win back Russia's trust? Nothing. Russia's never going to trust you again, not for a long time, not in this generation, not afterwards. But just because Russia doesn't trust you doesn't mean that you can't have good relations. But you've ruined it. Why would Russia ever trust Germany again, or France, or anybody in Europe? Why? Listen to Father Vladimir. Father Vladimir said, if I had to go back to 2000, what advice would I give myself? And he said, don't be so naive about your so-called partners. Russia will never view the West the same. Not until there's a radical transformation of who we are and what we are, because we can't be trusted. We are liars. We lie about everything. And I mean literally everything. It shames me how much we lie. We can't tell the truth about anything. Nothing. We lie. Again, let's just look at the lies. CNN publishes a report that says that the Russians, of the 360,000 Russian troops that were in the special military operation theater of operations at the beginning of the war, 317,000 of them, or 87%, have been killed or wounded. And it's an intelligence report that was written just for Congress at this time. But what's cool about it is it was then declassified and leaked to CNN. Now, one of the things you do in the intelligence business is you look at past patterns of behavior, because that sort of dictates what's going on now, especially if the same people are involved. It wasn't too long ago, we'll call it the spring of 2022, that the head of the National Security Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency, oh gosh, we'll even call it Jake Sullivan, the head of the National Security Council, admitted, they said, we declassify intelligence so it can be released to the mainstream media, and they named CNN as one such outlet. That's what's pretty cool about it, because they're that stupid. They named CNN as one such outlet so that they can manipulate public opinion. Okay, so, and even if they know it's wrong, that was the beauty of it. Even if we know it's wrong, we're going to declassify it and release it just because this is information warfare. So look at the timing of this, because timing's important. Congress is being pressured by Joe Biden to release $60 billion worth of money to Ukraine. Congress doesn't want to. One of the main reasons why Congress doesn't want to is that, as Lindsey Graham, who has always been in favor of giving Ukraine money, and he's the guy that said it's the best investment we got because we're killing Russians and it's not costing us any bodies. We just give money to the Ukrainians and they fight to the last Ukrainian. Isn't life nice? But now he's saying I can't go home to South Carolina and tell my constituents that I care more about Ukraine's security than I care about our security. And He's talking about the southern border. He's talking about immigration policy. So the Republicans have linked, immigration policy reform and actual funding of the wall and all the technologies associated with protecting the border, more agents, the whole thing. They said you got to fund this before we talk about Ukraine money. But remember, Congress is, I think we call it bicameral. I might be wrong on that one, but I think that means two houses. There's the upper house, the Senate, and the lower house, the House of Representatives. The Senate doesn't get to just do whatever it wants to do. The Senate can come to some sort of compromise position and say, yep, we all agree on reform and we're going to release the money. And the House is going to say pound sand, because the House has some other priorities out there. Mike Johnson came out and said, I'm not against giving Ukraine money, but before we give them $60 billion more on top of the 120 plus billion we've already given, Ukraine's going to have to show us a plan to victory. I mean, what do they plan to do with this? Are they going to go on another counteroffensive? That didn't work. So we need a plan. How do you plan on taking 60 billion and turning it into victory? And, oh, by the way, we need accountability. We're not just going to give you money anymore. We need to know how this money is being spent, who's getting the money, why they're getting the money, what are we expecting from the money. We need to account for it. And Ukraine can't meet the first requirement because they don't have a plan besides give me money. And they'll never accept the other one, because the whole thing about Ukraine is it's a giant grift. It's a giant embezzlement scheme. It's a kickback scheme. There is no such thing as a clean contract. Every contract includes a kickback. Every contract. Did you see the story about that the actor Trujillo or something? He plays Scarface and Machete and stuff like that. Now we found out a lot more about why Ben Stiller and all these actresses and actors went to Kiev, because the Ukrainian government said, hey, we want you to come to Kiev and do a little PR stunt, meet the president, do all that. And he said, sure, it's a gig. How much are you going to pay me? He's not going over there because he loves the Ukrainians. How much are you going to pay me? They said, pay you $100,000. He said, all right, that's fair. I'll do it. But then they said, but we're going to give you $150,000 and you're going to give me 50 back in cash. And he went, what? No. I don't do that. Danny Trejo. There we go. Thank you, Rock and Rowdy. Danny Trejo. He said, no, I don't do that. There's no kickbacks. Well, that's how the Ukrainians work. And that literally is a 33% kickback. I mean, that's a high.
I haven't heard this. Is this just some rumor, or is this confirmed?
No. He came out and talked about it. He's straight up saying it. He charged them $100,000, and they said, well, we're going to give you 150, but you got to give us 50 back in cash.
Right.
And he went, that ain't going to happen. So,
wow.
That's so that's
when people are used for propaganda, like Anakis, and before you said CNN is sometimes fed information that they disseminate as propaganda in order to influence public opinion. Is there any chance that you are used in that same way? Like, for example, when you said that senior Russian official told you when Russia will use nuclear weapons, is there a chance that you're being used in that same way?
There's always a chance. I mean, you can put that out there. What I would say is this: my intent is pure. I'm not playing a game.
Right.
All right. I'm also a very experienced analyst, and that experience can either be a sign of just age, or it can be a reflection of that I've actually been doing this for a long time and getting good results. I'll take both. I'm old and I've been doing it for a long time.
Isn't doing it for a long time the same thing as a reflection of age?
Not really, because if you've been doing it for 20 years and you started when you're 18, you're only 38.
Oh, okay.
Right. But my point is, I build into everything I do. Trust me, before I open my mouth and repeat something, I do my due diligence. I go out and I fact check and I run the logic on it and all that. So if you haven't learned anything about me in listening to the show, it's that I'm very logical. It doesn't always mean I come up with the right conclusions, but it does show that to get from A to Z, I actually go through all the letters. I don't take any shortcuts. And And so I'm not going to sit here and say something about a conversation I had with somebody if I haven't already run the checks on it, the checks and balances. It checked out. Doesn't mean that I can't be being used. That's possible. I've always told people when I speak, never, ever, ever take what I say at face value. Never. Assume that I'm working for the Russians, and then receive what I say and then fact check it. Run the logic test yourself. And if through that process, if the end you go, I agree with Scott. Notice what you just said. I agree with Scott because I have tested it and I believe that Scott's telling the truth, as opposed to what Scott said's right, man. Why? Because he said it. No. So yeah, I think I passed the propaganda test. But with the U.S. government, there's no pure intent there. It's deliberately done to misinform the American people. Deliberately done to misinform the American people. They know they're releasing bad intelligence. They're releasing it to the media for the specific purpose of influencing public opinion. And that's not good.
All right, want to take a phone call, Scott?
Sure.
Hey, you're on with our favorite weapons inspector. He has a cold, so be extra nice to him.
My question is regarding Scott last Friday explained us very clearly that Israel maintained nuclear ambiguity to make sure that it's possible for United States to help Israel because Israel is not a member of the non-proliferation treaty. My question is, there is another way to leave the ambiguity. Let's suppose that Israel attack with a nuclear weapon, let's say Iran. Now, the nuclear ambiguity is lifted because they just attack with a nuclear weapon. Does it mean that in this case, America will not be able any longer to support Israel?
Well, legally, it means America can no longer support Israel. Practically, given the fact that Israel owns the U.S. Congress, Israel owns pretty much the mass media. Scott, you're sounding very anti-Semitic. I know, but I'm not. I'm just stating fact. Look, when AIPAC says we're going to spend $100 million to buy Congress in the 2024 election, sort of I believe them. And when I was at NBC News, I just remember the producers. I was sitting there. I forget who I was getting ready to do an interview with. I think it might have been Brian Williams, and so they're setting me up. They're getting all the cameras ready and everything. And the producer comes up and says, "Oh, by the way, Scott," and the producer and the cameraman, and they handed me their AIPAC cards, and they thanked me for what I was doing, and they wanted to make sure that I got in touch with them so they could work on getting me in a speaking engagement and everything. AIPAC is everywhere, and they control everything. It's not, prove me wrong. I'll prove me right. Just give me the AIPAC membership list and look at where they're employed, and you'll see that they've infiltrated every place. And remember, AIPAC's not innocent. AIPAC was actually senior AIPAC people were arrested and charged with espionage back in the 1990s. They were accused of working with the Israeli government to take classified information from the Pentagon through AIPAC, because AIPAC works. Again, they're everywhere. They work with think tanks, and the idea was that the think tanks would get access to this classified information from the Pentagon, then share it with AIPAC, and then AIPAC would give it to their Israeli handler. So they're spies. They're traitors. They betray America. That's what AIPAC does. But they're literally everywhere. So what I'm trying to get at is that, it wouldn't be the first time hypocrisy reigns supreme in Washington, D.C. But I will also say this, that it's collective punishment. And you combine that with, again, we have to deal with another reality here. What Israel knew about Hamas in Gaza is no longer at play. Hamas, when they attacked on October 7th, captured the computer servers containing the Israeli intelligence about their assets inside Gaza. So Israel went blind in terms of human resources. They attacked the Unit A200 signals intelligence platforms. Israel went blind in terms of intercepting communications. So what Israel thought they knew about Gaza changed overnight. When they went in on October 7th, 8th, 9th, and thereafter, they're going in blind. They have to start all over. And how does Israel do this? Through an over-reliance of artificial intelligence. They have a targeting algorithm that they've developed where they've linked each house in Gaza to a specific outcome for Hamas. It doesn't mean that they're going to achieve it, but if you hit this house, this is what it does to Hamas. And they also know that this is how many civilian casualties will be accrued. So there is no, oh, this is collateral damage. We had no idea so many people would die. This is deliberate murder based on target. It's called the gospel. I think the Jewish term is hasbara or something of that nature. That's in play today. This is mass murder, genocide by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people. And it failed. And so it failed on a number of fronts. It failed in regards to Hamas, but because it failed so egregiously, the Netanyahu government was under pressure from a domestic audience saying, hey, you're not succeeding. We need our relatives freed. We need the hostages released. The entire world reacted to this collective punishment, this indiscriminate bombing with horror, millions of people in the streets. The United States State Department filed a memorandum, internal memorandum, a dissent memorandum saying the policies of the Biden administration are destroying the credibility and viability of America abroad. And so we started putting pressure. So Netanyahu had to agree to a ceasefire. He didn't want to. This was a political disaster for him. And so he was looking for any excuse to get out of the ceasefire. He found it. They're now back at war. He can't afford to have a second ceasefire. That would be the end of him politically. But he's failing militarily. As we speak, the Netanyahu government is being, the IDF, is being defeated in certain areas of Gaza. They've had to retreat from certain areas in Gaza because of the casualties they've taken. This is hugely demoralizing for their military. So Netanyahu is in his government are in a very dire straits in terms of their domestic political reality. There's nothing they can do to change the fact that Netanyahu's political days are over. He is the problem, not the solution. He will be removed from power, either from pressure from the United States or pressure from domestic or both. But we need to stop talking about what Israel wants right now. Israel doesn't want anything. Netanyahu wants everything. He needs to be removed and a new, more legitimate Israeli government in place that speaks on behalf of the majority of the Israeli population, then can speak about what they want. They may not change their policies. Who knows? But I think, real politic will set in, and the Israelis are going to have to make adjustments. Economically, they cannot sustain this fight indefinitely. With hundreds of thousands of reservists mobilized who are no longer participating in the economy, with tens of thousands of Israeli citizens displaced from not only around Gaza, but in the north, forced to be resettled, no jobs. They're living off of the support provided by the Israeli government. The economy is faltering. Hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jews are fleeing Israel for more stable locations. This is a strategic defeat, a disaster for Israel, that if they can't find the way to defeat Hamas, and I don't believe they can, you can't defeat an ideal, especially one that resonates so strongly amongst not only the Palestinian people, but the entire world. It can't be defeated by Israel. So I think Israel won't get what it wants out of this war. We have to understand that they did not initiate this conflict. They didn't want this conflict. They weren't expecting this conflict. The Netanyahu government on October 6th had a policy that was predicated on the normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia, the initiation of this new economic-based conception that was described by Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden announced it during the G20 meeting in India, talked about the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. Benjamin Netanyahu bragged about it during his presentation to the General Assembly in the United Nations. This was the direction that Israel was going. Israel was also, under the Netanyahu government, making sure that there would never be a two-state solution, never be a Palestinian state. They were in the process of expanding operations to create new settlements in the West. And they thought that they had bought off Hamas and the Palestinians in the Gaza by increasing the number of work permits, that this perception of new economic viability on the part of the Gazan Palestinians linked to a relationship with Israel, an ongoing economic relationship, would preclude any precipitous actions by Hamas. So when October 7th came around, the Netanyahu government is faced with a whole new reality. And now they're adjusting to it. And this reality is 100% security, politically motivated. It's couched as a security reaction, but it's political. Benjamin Netanyahu was a politician already fighting for his political life prior to October 7th because of what he had done in terms of rewriting Israeli basic law regarding control of the judiciary. It was supposed to be an independent branch of government, and instead, under the new law, it would be subordinated to a politicized Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And the purpose of this wasn't to improve Israeli jurisprudence, but rather to prevent the prosecution of Benjamin Netanyahu on corruption charges. So, hundreds of thousands of Israelis were already in the streets protesting against this man. The Israeli president had said that the situation was so dire that Israel could be looking at an actual civil war. And then comes October 7th. And so you have this already unpopular prime minister now presiding over the greatest security failure in the history of Israel. This is bigger than 1973 Yom Kippur War. This is a absolute failure on the part of the Netanyahu government, but also Israeli intelligence and the Israeli Defense Force themselves. And so the entire leadership of Israel is at risk of losing political viability, meaning that they should and could possibly be removed from power at any moment. The only reason why they're staying in power is because the Netanyahu government now has declared war, or as they have said, war was declared on Israel by Hamas. And if you're in for a dime, you might as well be in for a dollar. So if you're going to go to war with Hamas, now you articulate goals and objectives that reflect this war status. And you say that Israel is going to destroy not only the military aspects of Hamas, the organizational structures of Hamas, but politically, Hamas will be eliminated. Hamas will never again rule Gaza. And if you look at it from that standpoint, Israel has failed across the board. When we take a look at the millions of people who are in the streets in cities around the world protesting in support of Palestine, they're protesting in support of Hamas. They may not admit they are, but the reality is they wouldn't be there if it weren't for Hamas. They wouldn't be there if Hamas hadn't attacked Israel and created this overreaction, or the opportunity for this overreaction. It's Israel that has done it to itself. Israel didn't need to invoke the Dahiya doctrine, named after the West Beirut suburb, which in 2006 Israel flattened as part of a new principle of collective punishment, that makes sure that any civilian population linked to a political entity that is poses a security threat to Israel, that they will be punished collectively to put pressure on them, to pressure their own political entity to stop doing what Israel objects to. It was done against the Lebanese to put pressure on Hezbollah. It failed miserably. And it's been done repeatedly against the Palestinians in Gaza to put pressure on Hamas. This is even prior to October 7th, and it's failed miserably. And it's failing now. This collective punishment that Israel has undertaken has turned the world against Israel. This is a victory for Hamas. We need to also point out that the Netanyahu government was vociferously against a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, said there will not be one. They believe in Eretz Israel, greater Israel, or biblical Israel. That doesn't include any notion of Palestinian statehood. And so right now, the entire world is talking about the absolute necessity of a two-state solution. Again, this wouldn't have happened without Hamas. Israel had taken thousands of Palestinians prisoner. They'd taken thousands more prisoner, treated them brutally, subjected them to torture, rape, murder. Nobody was talking about putting pressure on Israel to release these prisoners, these hostages held by Israel, until Hamas attacked on October 7th and took hostages of their own, which they use as a bargaining chip. This is a Hamas victory, not an Israeli victory. Israel is suffering huge political consequences. More pressure is put on Netanyahu daily by the families of the remaining hostages to get their release. And Israel is not destroying Hamas. Hamas military is fighting the Israeli Defense Force to a standstill in many parts of Gaza. They're inflicting very significant casualties on Israel. And remember, Israel says that their victory is defined by the total destruction of Hamas. And if Israel doesn't achieve that, then Israel is by definition lost. And Israel right now is not achieving this. So the Netanyahu government has achieved nothing. They've made the situation even worse for Israel, and they've made it worse for them politically. Netanyahu has a 4% approval rating. He had an emergency meeting of his war council the other night, and he concluded the business without holding the things he was putting forward up to vote. The point is, Israel's achieved none of its objectives, and it's not going to achieve these objectives. These objectives unrealistic, and the Netanyahu government isn't doing anything for the legitimate security of Israel. They're doing everything for their own political survival, and I think their days are numbered. I think pressure is being put on them internally from domestic political opposition, and externally from friends and allies, including the United States, who are saying that it's increasingly clear that the problem here is Benjamin Netanyahu, and that Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition government have to step aside, have to get out of the way.
When it comes to the situation that Israel was in before October 7th, in terms of the relations with Arab states, with other countries surrounding Israel, how do you see it right now?
The fact is, Israel is in very many ways, because of its overwhelming support by the United States, the support that it gets from the United States, has become a de facto indispensable nation of the Middle East. And you combine that with the reality that, with very few exceptions, most nations in the Middle East are not pro-Palestinian. They're not supportive of the Palestinian Authority or a Palestinian state. And that Israel had exploited this antipathy amongst the Gulf Arab nations, for instance, amongst Israel's immediate neighbors, toward the Palestinians for their own good, leveraging the concept of the possibility of a Palestinian state that could never be reach manifestation because of the definition. This is the Abraham Accord. What Israel has said about a two-state solution, it's unattainable, unachievable, unrealistic, but it's there on the table. And the Arab nations who claim to be supporting Palestine, but who secretly don't, say, well, Israel's made a good faith effort here. Now we'll normalize relations with Israel, so we can get on with reaping the economic and geopolitical benefits of normalization. That all appears to be on hold, but nothing's fundamentally changed. The political reality of the situation is such that these nations have to take a stance that appears to be supportive of the Palestinian people of a Palestinian state, but they are distancing themselves from Hamas and they aren't cutting off relations with Israel, which tells me that if and when this conflict ends, and it will end, that there's a real risk that the nations that are lining up to support a Palestinian state today will slide back to their previous posture of either indifference or hostility towards Palestine. And this will be to the benefit of Israel. Now, the longer this conflict goes on and the deeper the damage that Israel is doing to itself in terms of its how the world perceives it, could create a new political dynamic, a new political reality amongst these Arab states. And if that happens, then there will be a Palestinian state. There's no doubt in my mind. But if this conflict is brought to an end and then the cause of a Palestinian state goes into endless negotiations by people who really don't have the best interests of Palestine in mind, we could find ourselves returning to square one, which then brings up Hamas, which is not going to quit until there is a Palestinian state. And I think that the failure of Israel to defeat Hamas empowers Hamas politically and gives them increased leverage to tell the Arab world, the Islamic world, that we will not go away. We will not quit. We will continue to resist. And that the best way to bring peace and stability to the region is to create a true Palestinian, independent Palestinian state, which includes Hamas as a political entity. You can't make Hamas disappear. If there were elections in the Palestinian, in the Gaza and West Bank today, I think Hamas would win overwhelmingly. The Palestinian Authority has no credibility, none, zero credibility. Hamas has all the credibility in the world because it's the only Arab organization that's fighting for the Palestinian people.
How do you see the possibility of Hezbollah getting more seriously involved in this battle? Is that possible, in your opinion?
Oh, of course it's possible. It's even likely, given what Hezbollah has done is it has maintained a extraordinarily high levels of pressure on Israel along the border between Israel and Lebanon. The purpose of this was to force Israel to divert resources from Gaza to Lebanon and to put strain, economic and political strain on Israel at a time when it was supposed to be singularly focused on resolving the Gaza crisis. Up to 70,000 Israelis have been evacuated from northern Israel. They have to be housed, cared for at enormous economic cost to Israel. Whatever economic activity took place in the north has come to a halt. So that's an unsustainable reality that Israel can't just allow to occur. And Hezbollah keeps ratcheting up the pressure. Israel right now has confronted Benny Gantz, the Minister of War, has come out and said that Israel has no choice but to turn its attention to Lebanon to compel Hezbollah to withdraw from the border. This is suicidal. Lebanon is as prepared for whatever Israel is going to do as Hamas was prepared for Israel. And Hezbollah is an organization that has far more military capacity than Hamas. It will be fatal for Israel to expand this conflict. And I think that's why it might not happen, is that the Israelis know that if they engage decisively with Hezbollah, they will suffer a decisive defeat. And that could be very problematic, not only for the Netanyahu government, but for anybody who's joined his coalition, his wartime coalition, like Benny Gantz and others. So it's a very dangerous situation, one where there is an absolute threat of an expansion of this conflict to draw in Hezbollah, but also one that the consequences of such expansion are so dire that it might be difficult for Israel to act on it, which is what Hezbollah is betting on, that Israel will make a decision to seek a ceasefire before they make a decision to escalate. Time will tell.
One of the countries that is so important is Saudi Arabia. How do you see their policy in Gaza? Are they looking for some sort of sanity, some sort of solution for Gaza?
Well, their official position and what their real position is might be two different things. Their official position is that they support Palestine, they support the Palestinian people, they support a two-state solution, and therefore they are opposed to the ongoing Israeli actions. Their unofficial position is they were ready to normalize relations with Israel to, offset the axis of resistance, Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, the Houthi, pro-Shia militias in Iraq. Yes, because of China, Saudi Arabia, and Iran had normalized relations. But that doesn't mean that Saudi Arabia is going to roll over and play dead. It was not a Saudi surrender. And Saudi Arabia was very interested in ensuring that it maintain a dominant geopolitical position vis-a-vis the Middle East. And they were looking to do that by normalizing relations with Israel and creating the conditions where Israel would be able to insert itself into the Persian Gulf region in a way that helped offset, Iran's growing stature in these nations that are linked to the axis of resistance. So the Saudis are in a very, they're stuck between the horns of a dilemma right now. They can't continue to carry out a policy which, by any stretch of the imagination, is pro-Israeli in nature, normalizing relations, bringing Israel into the Gulf region to offset Iranian influence. And they can't ignore the new reality generated by Hamas's military operation on October 7th and what's transpired since then by ignoring a Palestinian two-state solution. So I think what Saudi Arabia is doing is buying time, saying all the right things, hosting a conference, but doing nothing, and waiting to see where the chips finally fall before they would decisively commit. Remember, Saudi Arabia's number one purpose for doing anything is to benefit Saudi Arabia. So they're not going to be looking for something that brings about in and of its own right regional peace and security. They're going to be looking for something that benefits Saudi Arabia. It may be something that benefits regional peace and security, but it may be something different. Saudi Arabia has a vision, I think they call it Vision 2030, about a new Saudi Arabia, new economic realities, new social political realities. And that's the direction that, MBS is taking Saudi Arabia. And they cannot support anything that threatens that vision, because that vision is about a redefining of Saudi Arabia. It's what its economy looks like, what its geopolitical posture looks like. And that's going to require a lot of money to make happen. And that money won't be there if Saudi Arabia does anything that causes a disruption to, its oil-based economy, or fundamentally changes the balance of power in the Middle East, so that Saudi Arabia is compelled to take an action one way or the other. So this is a very, very dangerous situation, and one can always hope that the Saudis find a way to navigate their way through these troubled waters. I think it's important to point out that Israel wasn't the only nation taken surprise by Hamas's attack on October 7th. Saudi Arabia was taken by surprise, and Iran was taken by surprise. Prior to October 7th, Iran and Saudi Arabia were working together to create regional stability based upon, the emphasizing diplomacy over military confrontation. They had exchanged ambassadors, and they were, moving forward in a very coherent fashion to achieve, their collective desire for regional stability. After October 7th, both Saudi Arabia and Iran are struggling to catch up to the reality of what happened. Iran certainly doesn't want a larger regional war. Iran doesn't want to be drawn into the fighting, and Saudi Arabia doesn't want that either. Remember when Saudi Arabia hosted the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic States to a conference, an emergency conference on Gaza? Iran participated. The Iranian president has flown to Riyadh and has met with MBS and other Saudi officials to talk about the Gaza situation. So I think what we're seeing here is that Iran